are going to work from text 28 to 35 in first chapter of Bhagavad-gītā. And we're going to go over again the flow of chapter 1, Arjuna's reactions, Arjuna's reasons not to fight. And we'll talk a little bit about violence. We may get to some other things. We'll see how our time flows. I've changed the future. You can't change the past, but you can change the future. So I have altered a few things. So on the 19th, we're going to do part 5, which will be text 36 to 46. That'll finish up the chapter. On 4/26, we're going to do a review, an entire review of chapter 1. And I'll talk about some of the things. And then with May, the 3rd, we'll start with our June's further doubts and surrender. So we're going to start chapter 2 on the 3rd of May, and then our second version of chapter 2 will be on May 10th. All right, so that's kind of the flow of the future. And I may periodically change or update our future sessions as the need seems to rise in my weird little mind. So, I may decide to change things around a bit. Sometimes I discover that I've just got too much stuff and I have to spread it out over more sessions. I'm kind of getting a sense of how much stuff will fit in a single session. So today we're on chapter 1, part 4. This is session 21, and we're going to do sections or texts 28 to 35. And this is kind of the exact moment where this scene is relevant. Arjuna and Krishna are drawn between the two armies, and they haven't begun to fight yet, but they soon will. And as I said, these are the things we're going to go over today. The flow of chapter 1, Arjuna's reactions, Arjuna's reasons not to fight, and violence. So I'm right now in this part of the Bhagavad-gītā, we have still quite a lot of narrative. In other words, it's coming out of the Mahabharata, and what's relevant at this stage is a lot of the history of what led up to this battle. But by the time we hit chapter 2 and beyond, that all fades into the background. And we've got mostly just philosophical dialogue. And so I'm trying to distinguish now between what is narrative, in other words, the overall situation, the setting, the battle, and what is the local, current philosophical dialogue. And then on the larger view, what are the larger philosophical underpinnings to this entire Bhagavad-gītā? Because every philosophy is based on certain underpinnings. And so sometimes I'll focus on the underpinnings, sometimes I'll focus on the current dialogue, and other times I will just focus on the narrative. But as I say, the narrative's going to sort of fade out by the time we hit chapter 2. Yeah.
I just have a little question based on the art. So besides using horses in battle, they also sat just as the same with elephants?
Yeah. Elephants were the first tanks. Yeah, I know. It's interesting that in our modern warfare, tank culture came from the concept of the elephant, that, you've had cavalry for a long time in warfare. And those who were very gifted at horse riding usually tended to win battles because they could get from one place very quickly. But elephants were kind of like they could just buffalo through anything. Nobody's going to stand in the way of an elephant. So kind of like tanks, eventually. The idea of tanks arose in modern warfare. Now they're of limited use because we have anti-tank, ordnance that can take a tank out pretty easily. Okay, so here again, I'll keep returning to this because what I'm really trying to do is not to lose the forest for the trees, to preserve the sense of how this all flows. So here's the flow again of chapter 1. We've talked about this a number of times, but we have Sanjaya and Dhritarashtra. They're verses 1 and 2. Sanjaya is responding to Dhritarashtra, asking a question about what's happening on the battlefield. Then from verses 3 to 6, Duryodhana assesses the Pandavas. We talked about how he first assesses the Pandava army, and then later he assesses the Kaurava army, 7 through 11. And then the conch shells were blown. And so that happened last week, the conch shells being blown. And then now, actually, no, what happened last week was Krishna drives a chariot between the armies. That's 20 to 26. And now we see Arjuna's doubts surface. But we're going to take this in two pieces because from 27 to 42 is a lot of verses. So we're going to break it into Arjuna's reactions, and we'll start a little bit with Arjuna's motivations and reasons for not wanting to fight. We're going to start with that, but we'll get mostly just into Arjuna's reactions today. So again, Sanjaya and Dhritarashtra, then Duryodhana assesses the Pandava army, the Kaurava army, the conch shells are blown. Then Arjuna asks Krishna to drive the chariot between both armies. And then Arjuna begins to have a reaction to seeing who's on the other side. And then he begins to express his doubts, which go all the way to the end of this chapter. And they bleed over into chapter 2 for the first few verses, And then by chapter 9 or 10, then Krishna starts answering Arjuna's objections. All right, so again, that's kind of what we've been doing. We've been discussing these things, and right now, very front and center is this narrative. There's a battle. Why the battle is happening is because the Pandavas were supposed to get the chance to get some of their kingdom back after they had met the terms of the gambling match, but Duryodhana refused to do it. There were many attempts at negotiation. All of them failed. Finally, the only thing left was battle, and that's now about to begin. And so that's where we are. So, yeah, if you have
Just
any.
one quick question. Again, about the animals, actually. Isn't 4 white horses significant, meaning...
Yeah,
different
they're
things,
actually
and what is
the horses on Krishna and Arjuna's chariot all have names, but I've forgotten what they are. So I don't know how many there were, whether there were 4 or 5. Here they're depicting 4. I don't know if that's always the way it is. We'll see in the next picture, which also depicts the horses. There it looks like there's 4 also. So maybe there were just 4. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. So, yeah, 1, 2, 3, and there's one that's off screen there. You have to crop these pictures, That's the nice thing about Microsoft PowerPoint, is that you can drop the picture in there and then you can decide what part. If the picture is the wrong, what do they call it? The wrong, not perspective, but the wrong, I can't think of the term now. It may be, like landscape instead of portrait, and so you have to, long aspect. So therefore you can crop it in some way. So the whole picture probably has more of that 4th horse in there, but this one gets cropped. All right, so here are our verses for today. We're going from verse 28 to 35, and this is the first group of them, 28 through 31. So 28, Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up." So Krishna was asked by Arjuna to drive the chariot between both armies. And Arjuna is not really aware of what's about to happen, but Krishna is. Krishna knows that Arjuna is going to have second thoughts when he sees the other army. It's not dawned on Arjuna yet that he's going to have to fight with so many of his relatives. Again, usually battles, Arjuna is no stranger to warfare, but he is stranger to fighting a battle against all these people that he knows very well. And some of them he respects, and some of them he feels are improper even to be fought with because they're his teachers. So, at any rate, that's going to happen. So now Arjuna is having a physical reaction to seeing the army on the other side. It's a physical reaction. And this is very easy to read in the narrative here of Arjuna's speech. Arjuna said, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up. My whole body is trembling, my hair is standing on end, my Bhagavad-gītā is slipping from my hand, and my skin is burning." 30. I'm now unable to stand here any longer. I'm forgetting myself, and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune, O Krishna, killer of the Keshi demon. So, because we're not doing these verse for verse, sometimes I'll summarize some of what the purport says, what Prabhupada says. In this one, Prabhupada focuses on nimitani viparyatani. That's a Sanskrit words that appear in the Sanskrit version of verse 30, nimitani viparyatani, which means undesirable outcome or contrary causes. So Arjuna is thinking that either way, this is going to be bad. If he loses, then he'll be, shamed, and he'll lose his prestige as a warrior, and he'll lose all of his kingdom. If he wins, all the Kauravas will be dead, and he'll feel an incredible amount of remorse that this has happened. And so he can't see how in any way after the battle there'll be any good outcome of it. So that's why he is deciding that his mind is confused at this time. And he's saying, I do not see how any good can come from killing my own kinsmen in this battle, nor can I, my dear Krishna, desire any subsequent victory, kingdom, or happiness. It's interesting that time will tell at the end of the battle, this was not Arjuna's mental attitude at the end of the battle. However, strangely, this is the mental attitude that Yudhisthira adopts at the end of the battle. So that's kind of bizarre. It's at this point, it's Arjuna who's having doubts. But at the end of the battle, it's Yudhisthira who has doubts. And they have exactly the same doubts, but Arjuna has them all before the battle, and Yudhisthira has them all after the battle. So this is, as Prabhupada says in the purport, that when people feel their mouth drying up, as I'm feeling now, but I'm not experiencing any ecstatic symptoms. I'm just feeling dry mouth. So there's two times Prabhupada says this happens. One is when a person is in incredible spiritual ecstasy. So people who are in very spiritually ecstatic frame of mind, their consciousness is such that they may have tears, they may be trembling, they may feel their voice choking up. These are all symptoms of great emotion overcoming the individual. But it can also happen in great material fear. So both of those are possibilities. This kind of reaction can happen when somebody is in great fear, and it can happen when somebody is in great spiritual ecstasy, in both ways. So we're starting to see a hint of Arjuna's reasons for deciding that maybe fighting is not the correct thing. So here is 32 to 35. So some of these verses are grouped together. So 32 to 35 is one group of verses. Sometimes they're individually pieced out, and sometimes they're grouped together. So 32 to 35. O Govinda, of what avail to us are a kingdom, happiness, or even life itself, when all those for whom we may desire them are now arrayed on this battlefield? O Madhusudan, when teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles, fathers-in-law, grandsons, brothers-in-law, and other relatives are ready to give up their lives and properties and are standing before me, why should I wish to kill them, even though they might otherwise kill me? O maintainer of living entities, I am not prepared to fight with them, even in exchange for the three worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? There's an interesting group of things that are happening here. Usually, when there are people who are aggressive, when there are people who are very self-centered, they don't consider how what they do or what they want affects other people. They simply want what they want. And when such people get further and further out of control, usually some kind of governmental force has to come in and deal with the situation. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit when we talk about violence. But when somebody feels compassion, even for those who are aggressors, then that's a good sentiment, usually we say. However, that doesn't negate the fact that those aggressors have to be neutralized in some kind of way, which is why we have, and as far as I know, all major societies have always had police and they've always had soldiers. There's a need for both groups of people because there's always a chance that those who can motivate themselves and utilize force can take what doesn't belong to them and do what they want with it. And that's been going on since the world started. So when people are kind-hearted, oftentimes this gets seen as weakness by those who are aggressors. And then they think, oh, now we can be even more aggressive. So Arjuna, as Prabhupada says in the purports, if we read the purports in this section, that Arjuna is not fearful of the other side. Arjuna has no fear of the Kauravas. But at the same time, he's thinking about, well, I'm going to have to fight them, and probably many of them, if not all of them, will die. And so this is not a good thing. Of course, we know how the Kauravas would interpret this. They would think, oh, Arjuna is afraid of us. That's how they would relate to the same thing. So this is why this is an interesting moment in the battle. Of course, as we know, as the whole story unfolds, what will ultimately happen is that in about 30 minutes, Krishna will speak the entire Bhagavad-gītā, 30 or 45 minutes, whatever time it takes Krishna to speak it. And in that length of time, Arjuna's mind will be completely placated, and he will be convinced to fight, and the battle will fight just as it was originally planned. So here are some of Arjuna's reasons to withdraw. We won't get too deep into these today, because actually most of these are in the section that will happen next week, and the week after, and the week after that. So you'll see some of these reasons, are even in chapter 2, 2.6, 2, 4, and 5. I've put where these different arguments to withdraw are located in what verses. So these are the 5 reasons that Arjuna feels that he shouldn't fight. One is out of compassion, as we just heard, out of compassion. So that one was right there in 127, which we just read. I'll back up. Actually, that was before this section, okay. So 127. So compassion means that he feels that the Kauravas will die. So as a result of not wanting to harm them, he's thinking we shouldn't fight this battle. And then in 137, 138, and 144, 145, and then in 2.4 and 2.5, the same theme of compassion is there. Enjoyment, he is just said that. Let me remember which ones we just did today. I keep always forgetting. So to 35. Yeah, so we just read that one. Why should I wish to kill them even though they might otherwise kill me, O maintainer of living entities? I'm not prepared to fight them, even in exchange for the 2 worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? So in this section, we find this idea that is in Arjuna's mind, that if the Kauravas are killed, then how will he enjoy? Because usually we don't want to just selfishly enjoy everything on our own. We want to enjoy things in the company, in the association of our family and relatives. But if all the family and relatives are dead, then there's nobody to enjoy them with. And so this is Arjuna's reason for not wanting to fight. Number 2, enjoyment. And then later, in next week's section, we'll hear about destruction of family, how he'll talk about how whenever there's a battle like this, husbands are killed and wives all become widows. And therefore, you have the possibility of then the degradation of womanhood, as it's put. In other words, that women could become involved with other men and so on and so forth. So this is a very bad situation, and children grow up without fathers. So it destroys the family whenever there's a war like this. This is another one of Arjuna's arguments. And fear of sinful reaction. Every action Arjuna understands has a reaction. That's the law of karma. So when a person does something, what to speak of becoming involved in a war, then every action has some reaction. So he's thinking, if we're fighting a war and this war is an unjust war, then we will soak up all this sinful reaction, and this is a bad thing. And then finally, his fifth reason, which becomes visible in the next chapter, in chapter 2, is indecision, that he's thinking that we don't know whether it's the right thing to fight or not. So I'm not getting too deep into these this week, because really next week we will go over them again, and we will try to connect them to the various verses again. But these are the 5 reasons, and I usually think of the acronym CEDFI. If you take the first letter of each of these, CEDFI, CEDFI, then you can remember that there are 4 reasons. You know, when we do this in Bhakti Shastri, then this is usually something that everybody gets tested over, is whether they can remember Arjuna's 5 reasons not to fight. So these, of course, again, all this is predicated on the idea of karma. It's all predicated on the idea of free will. That's why we talked about free will. We haven't talked much about karma yet, but we have talked about free will. That means that people have in front of them the ability to desire anything they want. And when they go through unfolding events in the daily course of life, they are making choices. Some of those are sinful choices, and some of those are correct choices. And as a result, they are getting karma. And that karma will later filter back into their lives. And if they were doing wrong things, then they will suffer as a result of their karma. And if they were doing the correct things, then they will get benedictions as a result of their karma. So this is how all this is predicated. So if there were no karma, if free will didn't exist, none of this would make any sense. And wars would just be meaningless violence. But the Bhagavad-gītā doesn't have that outlook, and the Bhagavad-gītā is predicated on the idea that there is such a thing as free will, and Bhagavad-gītā is predicated on the idea that there's such a thing as karma. And so Arjuna is pondering, is this a karmically correct thing to engage in this battle? Of course, he's right next to Krishna, and Krishna is the Supreme Person. So whatever he thinks or whatever he wants is by very definition the proper thing. So there's never any sinful reaction if one serves the Supreme Lord, which is also the basis of bhakti. The bhakti means to try to please the Supreme Lord. Any questions about those? We were just kind of going over these basics here. All right. So now we'll talk a little bit about violence. So we have discussed this concept a little bit already. We've talked about it. That in every society, as far as I know, throughout all time, I don't know any government that doesn't have an army or a police force in the modern world, or for that matter in the previous world, any government that lasted for any length of time. And there's an obvious reason for this. The reason that we always have police, we always have military, is that people take advantage of their physical power or their military power. And because of their desire to take what others have, then they use their power to take away what actually doesn't belong to them. Many cultures, actually every culture, has to develop, some kind of agriculture, or some kind of way of dealing with things to make sure that we have clothes and food and housing, et cetera, et cetera. And this usually takes an enormous amount of work and effort. But there are some cultures that don't bother with any of that, they just take it away from people who are doing it, So that was something, if you look at the history of the world, that happened in many places at many times, that people with more superior ability to fight came in and just took away what belonged to others, their gold, their art, their produce, whatever they wanted, And so the nature of selfishness means that we want to enjoy, but we don't care how that enjoyment causes someone else to suffer. So if a person is pious, then they have a sense of not only just compassion, but they have a sense of empathy. They can understand what other people feel. So I wouldn't want somebody to come and take something away from me, so why should I take something away from somebody else? I wouldn't want to be physically imposed on as I walk down the street, so why should I physically impose on somebody else? So this is a sense of empathy, but some people lack that, and they simply want to get what they can get. And if there is no check and balance anywhere, then they will, by their own personal force, take away what belongs to others. So this is what happens when we lose personal control. A person should have control of themselves. And if they have control of themselves, then they can be part of a constructive society. But if a person has their own desires and those desires are out of control, then they create a destructive element in society. So when a person gets far enough out of control, the only way to bring them back into control is by direct use of force. And this is, it's not a new thing. It's not something that, the Bhagavad-gītā came up with. This has been done by practically every culture that we know. That's what the police are there for. They're there to use force when necessary to bring someone who is out of their control or is unlawfully using the force of their physical body to take things from other people that are not theirs, or to impose themselves on other people, or to brutalize other people. So this is, police use superior force to stop them, and then they're incarcerated or put in jail or whatever it is. So the idea here, of course, how this relates to Bhagavad-gītā, is that Arjuna and the Pandavas were supposed to be the rulers of the whole empire. But because of Duryodhana's schemes, he usurped the kingdom. And there was no way to get even a portion of the kingdom back, so now force has to be applied. And that's why we have to engage in this violent battle of Kurukshetra. And this is a kshatriya's duty. A kshatriya is either a police person or a warrior. So kshatriyas mean that they have to organize society, and they have to be the people who stop aggressors and punish and find perpetrators. And they control society in such a way that people who are bad actors do not cause society to degrade into an unmanageable situation. We can easily understand what our society would be like if there were no police, if there were no military. We would just have gangs, which is how it usually works whenever there's a war or some disaster and the overall structure of a country dissolves. Then that country gets plunged into a mob rule situation where powerful people get a few people around them, and then they take whatever they want from whoever they want to take it from. And that means that you can't have personal property. That means that you can't actually have exchange in society. You can't have a technological society. In other words, everything starts to disintegrate into a very brutish kind of existence. So the Kshatriya's duty, we'll come back to this when we get into chapter 2. And there's a whole section in chapter 2 where Krishna will talk about the duty of a Kshatriya. So we've talked about the events leading up to the Kurukshetra war, and we find that what Krishna really wants is he wants the Pandavas to be the ruler of the kingdom and not the Kauravas. However, it must be said that Duryodhana was not a wanton ruler. He was actually a capable ruler. However, he was not spiritually inclined at all. But according to the Vedic understanding of things, just being a capable ruler is not, the real purpose of government. Just having people keep order, that's not the real purpose of government. The real purpose of government is not only to keep order, but to make a society in which spiritual life is possible and encouraged. Not necessarily mandated, but it's possible and it's encouraged, which Duryodhana was in no way, shape, or form ready to do because he was unethical in his thinking. I mean, a person like Duryodhana we would hardly distinguish him from our modern rulers. He's not somebody who would strike us as anything very different than people that ruled much, much later than him. But at that time, there was much better option, and that was Yudhishthira, who was not only powerful, knowledgeable, self-controlled, but he also knew the purpose of government. So, purpose of government, again, is to keep order, so that people can live peacefully and there can be prosperity and interchange. And at the same time, to make it so that spiritual life is possible and encouraged. Okay, any questions about that? All right. So, So now we have discussed a number of things. We've talked about violence, and we've talked a little bit about government, which we also talked about last week. And we've looked at some of these, the dialogue. The narrative in this particular part of Bhagavad-gītā is that if we were looking at it on a camera or in a movie setting, we would see, Krishna and Arjuna talking to each other in between the two armies. And what's going on is that Arjuna is now having an emotional reaction to seeing the soldiers on the other side of the battlefield. He's having an emotional reaction to them. And this emotional reaction is beginning to segue into his reasons why he's starting to doubt the properness of this battle. And of course, later on, Krishna will change his mind on that. But right now, he's starting to doubt the properness. So that's the narrative. And the current local dialogue that's going on here is that they're talking, particularly Arjuna is speaking at this point, which is, it happens in Bhagavad-gītā, but most of Bhagavad-gītā is spoken by Krishna. There are a few places where Arjuna asks a question and Krishna responds. But most of the Bhagavad-gītā will be spoken by Krishna. However, here, Arjuna is doing all the speaking. So in the first beginning part, Arjuna is doing the speaking. And what's Arjuna speaking about? He's beginning to explain, first of all, his physical reaction to seeing that he's going to have to fight his relatives and people he respects. And now he's beginning to surface his doubts about the nature of the battle itself. So, and if we zoom out a little bit, we can see what philosophical underpinnings are involved here. So if we look at this from a philosophical perspective, we see the necessity of violence is being described here. That's one of the philosophical underpinnings. The Vedas, like practically every philosophy I know of, has the conception that there are times, although force, especially lethal force, is a last resort, still, there are times when that's the only thing that is appropriate to respond to a particular situation. So we're talking about that. We've talked about free will, that if somebody is doubting that free will exists, or they think that everybody is simply chemicals in the brain, and that whatever we do is already programmed in there depending on what our brain chemistry is, then such a person should not bother with calling the police if their house gets broken into, because obviously whoever broke into their house, they were just following their chemicals. And so this would suggest that the real understanding is that our whole society is based on acceptance of free will. And if we decide that maybe free will is not important, or we decide that free will doesn't exist, then everything, just let it go, because they're supposed to have somebody at the front desk. And this will happen every 2 or 3 minutes. Someone up there will hear. And so at any rate, if we decide that free will is actually a non-important element or doesn't exist, then our entire society will completely have to be rearranged, because we understand that as it stands now, we have a police force, we have an army, we have a court system, we have laws on the law books, and whenever you break the law, you can be taken to court or you can be taken to jail, depending on the nature of what you've broken. So this is all predicated on the idea of free will. Even in human interactions on a day-to-day basis, when we feel angry because somebody did something that impinged on us, somebody cuts us off on the freeway, or somebody pushes in front of us in line, or somebody takes something, or somebody squanders something, we get irritated. But this makes no sense unless you accept free will. So now I'm kind of again focusing on the large philosophical underpinnings. So the large philosophical underpinnings are that there is such a thing as free will, and that the Bhagavad-gītā and the whole idea of karma is predicated on free will. So karma means that because free will is a reality, when people do the wrong things, they get some kind of bad reaction. We call that vikarma. So doing the wrong thing, technically in Sanskrit, is called papa, or sinful action. The thing that happens to you when you perform, sinful reaction, is vikarma, or you get a reaction for it. Now, when you do, according to the Vedic literature, the right thing, that is called karma, or it's called punya, proper action, and as a result you get good karma back. Now there's a third thing, and we will talk about it more later. The third thing is akarma, which is bhakti. When you serve the Supreme Lord directly, you get neither good nor bad karma. Because either we get good karma or we get bad karma, we have to come back to this world in a body to enjoy or suffer either the good karma or bad karma. So directly serving the Supreme Lord nets us neither good nor bad karma. Of course, serving the Supreme Lord is a process where we are automatically doing good things for others, and we are automatically a force for constructive, cooperative society. We are personally in control of our own temperament and our own desires, and as a result, this is a good thing in society. It has all those benefits, but it doesn't have the unfortunate result of good karma that means we have to take birth again to enjoy that good karma. All right, so any last questions or?
What you were just saying reminds me, I heard it explain karma, I think it was Yugala a few years ago, Swami, like a silo on a farm. It's a silo, you put the grains in at the top, but what you get next is what is at the bottom that was put there
Right.
earlier.
Yeah. That's a good way to see it. You can think of it like putting there's a delayed reaction in the whole karmic sequence. We usually don't get karma immediately. We get there's a thing called prarabdha and aprarabdha karma. So prarabdha karma is the karmic backwash of things we did some time ago that is now matured, and it is actually being visited upon us currently. So,
and it could be from another life.
Yeah, it could be from another life, or it could be from this life. So that's why violent and terrible things can happen even to children, because children, sometimes people wonder, how is it that, little kids sometimes have horrible things happen to them. And so if they have horrible things happen to them, what could they have possibly done? And the answer is they didn't do anything in this lifetime. They did something in a previous lifetime. And now it's caught up to them in this lifetime. And so that's the reason why we're not all born equal, that some are not born with even the full use of all their senses because of some debility or some disease, whereas others are born maybe with exceptional prowess in some senses, which is a result of good karma. And in the net, we go from one lifetime to another, and we build up good karma and we build up bad karma. And when we take birth, we usually have done both. So we have to enjoy some things in the next life, and we have to suffer things in the next life. And usually this is an endless cycle, because people don't understand that it's not enough just to do good karma. Most people don't even know what good karma is anyway, so they don't know whether what they're doing is good or bad karma. But even if you did know what is good karma, that wouldn't be enough. You would still take birth again and again. It's only until you start devotional service that you actually begin to get out of the material world, because then you learn the real purpose of life is to connect again with service to the Supreme, get purified, and go back to the spiritual world, and not have another material life. There's nothing useful, good, or desirable about going through this cycle of reincarnation, also called samsara. So it's called samsara. But there's nothing good about it. Okay, so any final questions? Let's again take a quick look at what's up for next week. So next week we will finish up chapter 1, but we'll finish it up in the sense of we'll talk about the remaining verses. But of course we'll have one more week on chapter 1 where we'll review all these things we've been talking about. So 36 to 46 we'll get more into Arjuna's reasons not to fight, reality, perception and reality creation. I wanted to talk about those. Those are a little bit into how human beings come to see the world, and we'll talk about that next week a little bit. And then on the 26th of April, we will review the flow, the issues, we'll do a recap.